Hey there, and welcome into the first ever episode of the Route 1 Rundown, a podcast for those who eat, sleep, and breathe Maryland men's basketball. I'm your host, Steve Gorgei, and I'm thrilled to be here for this inaugural episode. If you found this feed, whether it was YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever, thank you. And I'm so excited that you've decided to be one of the earliest members of this new Maryland basketball community. I can't tell you how excited I am to get this thing started and actually start talking some Maryland hoops. But first, what is this show? Why am I here? What's it going to be about? What are we going to do? Well, it's very simple. I want this show to be for those of you out here who are just like me, who sign up every October, every November for BTN Plus, Big Ten Network Plus, so you can watch the Terps play Manhattan, Canisius, Maryland Eastern Shore, whoever it may be. I want this show to be for the people that are dedicated, passionate Maryland basketball fans. Those of you who are craving more Maryland basketball conversation. I want to have those conversations. I want to do reaction to games, analysis, look ahead. I have a lot of aspirations for this show, but I want to do and have conversations with people who are covering the Terps, covering the Big Ten, covering national college basketball, but also people like you and me who are passionate about Maryland basketball, because I think those conversations, when they're with people who also know the game, who also cover the sport, can be a lot of fun. So that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do here on this show. I want to cover the Terps. I want to cover the Big Ten and the national college hoops landscape as well, but through a Maryland lens. I think it's sometimes easy to forget that your team exists in this broader world, right? It's not just Maryland, but Maryland exists within the context of the Big Ten, within the context of the broader college basketball landscape. So I want to look at those things as well, but through a Maryland perspective, through a Maryland lens. So who am I? I mean, you're here, you're listening to this show. Clearly, you love Maryland. I think I've made it clear so far that I am passionate about the Terps. So who am I, though? Yeah, I am passionate about my Terps. At the core, I am passionate about Maryland basketball. I grew up going to games. One of my earliest sports memories is going to Cole Fieldhouse. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see Cole Fieldhouse on the wall right behind me there. An incredible place to get exposed to college basketball. But I started going to games when I was young here in Maryland. I'm from Maryland. It's a family thing for me. Maryland basketball is, and I've gone to games. I've been a fan of the Terps since I was very, very young. I went to Maryland, 2011 graduate of the University of Maryland, where, of course, I went to games while I was there, was a huge Terps fan. But I've also, more than that, I've also covered college sports via podcasts. I've done over 200 plus episodes of a college basketball podcast covering the sport from a national perspective, but also another podcast where I cover college football and college basketball from a national perspective. So together, I've done over 200 plus episodes of those two podcasts. And I've also work in college sports media right now, producing radio shows for SiriusXM, College Sports Radio, and the suite of conference channels over there. So I am somebody who has a deep passion for Maryland, but also a deep passion for the broader college basketball landscape, for college sports as a whole, enough that I have dedicated my life, my professional life, to covering this sport and being a part of this industry. And something that I haven't been able to do yet in my career is cover Maryland on a day-to-day basis, cover Maryland basketball specifically on a day-to-day basis. So that's why I'm here. That's what I want to do. I want to have those conversations that you are having. I want to give you that analysis, those breakdowns, that reaction that you are craving. And I want to build a Maryland basketball community here. So welcome to the show, and let's do just that. Let's get into it, because the season is just a few days away. I'm recording this on Thursday, October 31st. It's Halloween, and the season kicks off on Monday for the Terps. They have a home game against Manhattan. Not going to dive too much into that game directly. I want to preview the season a little bit as a whole, though. So let's start first by looking backwards. And Kevin Willard is coming off his second year here in College Park, and it was a disappointing one, to say the least. I thought his first year where the Terps made the tournament, I thought they overachieved. I thought it was a pleasant surprise. I thought it was a really fun season, one of the most fun seasons we've seen here in College Park in a while. Year two was the opposite of that. It was the exact opposite for me. Maryland goes 16-17 overall, 7-13 in conference. They finished 12th in a 14-team Big Ten. And for the second time in 3 years, Maryland finishes under 500. Of course, the first time there was in Mark Turgeon's last season when he decided to step down midway through the year. They finished under 500 in that 2022 season as well. So 2 times in the last 3 years. And that's a really big deal because before 2022, you would have had to gone all the way back to the 1992 season to find the last time that Maryland finished under 500. That was the last season before Gary Williams would start his run of 11 straight NCAA tournaments. I mean, that was a long time ago, and this is not the place that anybody who loves Maryland basketball, who watches Maryland basketball, wants the program to be at. So I think Kevin Willard, coming off a very disappointing year two, is approaching a very critical year three for him. I could say a lot about year threes and how important they are, and there's some numbers to back that up out there, but I think that was in the old world of college basketball. I'm not sure with how quickly you can flip a roster, with how quickly things can change in this day and age, how much those numbers still matter about year three and how pivotal they are. So I'm going to skip all that. In the old world, year threes were very, very important. In large part because it was probably when your first recruiting class was going to be upperclassmen. Your first recruiting class would be juniors in year three. That's not really the case in today's day and age with the transfer portal because you can flip a roster so quickly. And you know what? Kevin Willard, I think, did just that. He flipped this roster. So let's start by talking about who Maryland loses. Well, you got to start that list with Jahmir Young, who performed admirably over 2 years as Maryland's point guard. The 2 years ago, the season he had was unbelievable, leading the Terps to the NCAA tournament. He was last season second team All Big Ten by the coaches, first team All Big Ten by the media. He led the Terps in minutes, points, over 20 points per game, over 4 assists per game, just under 5 rebounds per game. He was the undisputed leader and go-to guy on that Maryland team, and he's a guy that they are desperately going to miss. But the problem last season, he couldn't do it all on his own. Another guy Maryland will lose that's notable is Dante Scott, the 6'8" 4-man who was a 5-year stalwart for Maryland. Unbelievably, he was a freshman on that 2020 COVID team that year that got cut short before the NCAA tournament. He's a guy who seems like he had been a Terp forever. I think on the whole, he did a lot of good things while here at Maryland. There was some frustration at times, maybe on the defensive end, maybe with some of the decision making, but all in all, I think Dante Scott provided a lot to this Maryland team. He was the third leading scorer on the team a season ago with just over 11 points per game, and he was second on the team in 3-point shooting percentage at 33.5% from deep, and that was something that Maryland struggled mightily with last season, and something that we'll get to in just a few minutes here. And then Maryland lost 5 transfers out of the program. Notably, Jamie Kaiser, who transferred to Butler. He was a really highly touted wing coming out of high school. He just really could never put it together offensively last season, despite getting a lot of opportunity, averaging just under 20 minutes per game a season ago. But he shot under 27% from the field and from deep. Not a good freshman season for Jamie Kaiser. He's a guy I think could have figured it out, but he decided to go to Indiana to go play for Butler. So that's what Maryland loses, but Maryland brings in a lot. Like I said, this is a new era of college basketball. It's a new day and age, and transfers rule the day. Maryland brought in 5. Most notably, a junior point guard from Belmont, Jacoby Gillespie. He was the number 48 transfer per 24/7. He was second team All Missouri Valley Conference a season ago. He was on the all defensive team a season ago, and he's a guy that they are going to look for to fill those very large shoes left by Jahmir Young. I'm not going to go through all these other transfers. We will talk about them over the course of the show, but I do need to call out Maryland brings in 2 freshmen. Most notably there, Derek Queen, a 6'10 big man from Baltimore, the number 12 player in the class of 2024 per 24/7 Sports composite rankings. He was the co-MVP of the McDonald's All-American game, and there are big expectations for Derek Queen in his first year in College Park. And then Maryland brings back Julian Reese, another big man, a guy who, like Dante Scott, has been a stalwart for this program. I mean, you just think about the coaching turnover that he's had to go through during his time here. He is a guy who I think there are sky-high expectations for this season. They also bring back Deshaun Harris-Smith, guy who came in with Jamie Kaiser with a big reputation as a guy, as a good defender who could score, struggled shooting the ball last year, but I think there's a lot to like about Deshaun Harris-Smith coming back. Those are 2 guys that were starters last season. I expect to be starters again this season. So let's dive into the meat of things here. 3 storylines I'm watching for Maryland as the season gets underway. Number 1, can Maryland shoot the ball better from beyond the arc? Because that is what doomed the Terps last year. Last year, Maryland was good defensively. They were strong defensively. Ken Pom, outstanding advanced analytics site, had them as the 14th most efficient defense in all of college basketball, nationally, in all of college basketball. But from beyond the arc, they shot 28.9%. That was 347th out of 362 teams in the nation. They were dead last in the Big Ten in conference games from beyond the arc, shooting 28%. That is atrocious, and that is extra atrocious in the year 2024. It doomed Maryland last year because Julian Reese had a very nice season in the front court a year ago. Jahmir Young, he was a first team, second team, all conference kind of guy, but not being able to shoot the basketball absolutely crushed Maryland, and it's something where the math just doesn't work, especially in 2024 when you have all these teams putting up all these threes and doing it at a pretty high clip. And look no further than Alabama and that run they went on last year to the national champion, or to the Final Four rather, a season ago. They ended up falling to UConn in the semifinal, but they get all the way to the Final Four because they were able to shoot the 3 ball. And when I talked about looking at the larger sport of college basketball and looking at the Big Ten through a Maryland lens, that's what I mean, right? Like, let's look at Alabama and say, okay, Alabama had a very high level of success, a national level of success, doing something much different than what Maryland is doing. That's how I kind of want to look at the sport nationally, because what Alabama did last year is what Maryland used to do, and what anybody who follows Maryland, who loves Maryland, aspires for them to do once again. So that's my number 1 storyline, is can Maryland shoot the ball better from beyond the arc? Because it's a must if they want to get back to the tournament this year. Now, there's some good news there. Jahari Long, who came off the bench for the Terp last year, he led the team in 3-point shooting at 35.5% on just over 2 threes a season ago. He's back, and I expect him to come off the bench again. But then the guys they brought in, and it's really 3 guards that we've heard a lot about this offseason: Jacoby Gillespie, who I mentioned, Rodney Rice, a transfer from Virginia Tech, and Selton Miguel, a guard from USF. Those guys are guys who have a reputation and an ability to shoot the ball from beyond the arc. Gillespie, just under 39% from beyond the arc on just over 4 attempts per game a season ago at Belmont. Selton Miguel, 39%. On 5.5 attempts per USF. He was second team all conference in the AAC a year ago. He was the 6th man of the year coming off the bench, and he was the most improved player in that league. 39% on 5.5 attempts in the AAC, that's nothing to sneeze at. If he can come in and he can do that here, that's huge for Maryland. That can help them get to the next level, help them become a tournament team. And then Rodney Rice is a guy who was really highly touted coming out of high school. 6'4" guard from DeMatha. He was the number 73 player in the class of 2022 per the 24/7 Sports composite rankings, and he struggled through injuries his freshman year at Virginia Tech. He did end up playing several games, 8 games, and he had a monster game in the ACC tournament in the 2023 season. 17 points on 5 of 7 from deep. That season, he shot 33% on 4.9 attempts per game. Nothing spectacular there, but when you see a 5 of 7 game in the postseason in the ACC tournament, that shows you that the talent is there. Now, last season, he decided to transfer in October before the season even got underway. So Rodney Rice is a guy who hasn't played a lot of basketball the past 2 seasons, and that's a question mark, certainly. But if Maryland is going to be better beyond the arc, I think it'll largely be because they brought in these 3 guards who have a reputation and something of a proven ability to shoot better from behind the arc. Now, there's also another guy who we forget about a little bit. Chance Stevens is a transfer that Maryland brought in not this past cycle, but 2 cycles ago. And he is a guy who was injured last year, but at Loyola Marymount, he shot 37.4% on just under 5 attempts per game as a true freshman at Loyola Marymount. Now, again, WCC, not the same level of competition as the Big Ten, but that's a guy who has proven he can shoot the ball from beyond the arc. I like what Maryland has from a shooting perspective, better than what we've seen in the past. And the final question mark here is, can Deshaun Harris-Smith be better at all behind the arc? Because last year, he only shot 20%. 20%. Not good enough, not going to cut it in the Big Ten. I think he does a lot of other things very well, especially defensively, but he needs to be better from beyond the arc. Can he improve at all? Can he make that sophomore jump? If he can even get up to 30%, that would be a huge deal for Maryland. So that's my number one storyline, my number one question for Maryland. Can they shoot better from beyond the arc? They got to be better than 347th nationally. They have to be better than last in the Big Ten if they want to get back to the tournament. And that's my expectation for this team this year, is to make the NCAA tournament. I think that's fair. I think at Maryland, the expectation has and always should be, you should make the tournament every single year. I get it. Sometimes something's going to happen. It's not going to go your way. But to me, the expectation at Maryland is you make the tournament every single year, and every couple of years, you make some sort of run. You get to a Sweet 16. You know, I'm not going to say I expect Final Fours because I'm lucky that I saw 2 Final Fours in my life, the only 2 Final Fours in Maryland history. It's hard to get to a Final Four. But what Gary Williams did while he was here at Maryland was he consistently got top 4 seeds, protected seeds. He got to Sweet 16s and eventually got to the Final Four and won a national championship. That's my expectation. You get to the tournament, you get to the second weekend, and, you know, if things break right, you get to a Final Four. So to me, that is the expectation this season. They need to get to the tournament, and I'd like to see a run to the second weekend. When you look at some of the expectations from a computer perspective, KenPom has them as number 36. BartTorvik.com is another site that I like a lot as far as analytics are concerned. He's a little bit lower on the Terps to start the season. He has them at number 48. When you look at bracketology, which I don't think really matters a whole lot at this moment, but I'm going to call it out anyway here. Joe Lunardi has Maryland in as the last 4 buys as of October 22nd in his preseason bracketology. Jerry Palm of CBS Sports doesn't have Maryland in. So it looks like the expectations nationally are that Maryland is going to be kind of a borderline bubble team. They need to be on the right side of the bubble for me in order to meet expectations this season. And ideally, I mean, win a game. But more than that, get to the Sweet 16. Make the tournament and win a game. I think I can live with that, especially because of some of these transfers that they did take, like a Jacoby Gillespie, has a couple years. Rodney Rice has a couple years. Derek Queen's a freshman. You never know. Is he going to be a one and done? I mean, that would be fantastic. If he was, then I would want to go a lot further than just the second round of the tournament. But there's a very real possibility Derek Queen is back next year. So make the tournament bare minimum for me. I'd like to get to a Sweet 16. We'll evaluate it when the time comes. Okay, number 2 storyline. I talked about Julian Reese coming back. I talked about Derek Queen coming in. How effectively can these two guys play together? Julian Reese last year was outstanding for the Terps. I think he's gotten better and better every year he's been at Maryland. Now, if you want to go negative, a lot of people will bring up his free throw shooting and his free throw shooting stroke. It's something that I see all the time on social media. When I talk to friends, people complain about that, right? But I want to go positive here with Julian Reese, because he averaged 9.5 rebounds and just under 2 blocks per game a season ago. He was also 9th in Evan Maya's DBPR, which is essentially a defensive rating. And number 9 in the Big Ten. Evan Miyakawa, I think, has an outstanding site when you want to look at analytics at a player level. It's Evan Maya, EVANMIYA.com. He was number 9. He was essentially the 9th best defender in the Big Ten last year. Julian Reese is a serious Big Ten big man. And he was honored by both the coaches and the media as an honorable mention All Big Ten selection a season ago. But he is the guy coming back for Maryland. He is the rock. He is the foundation. Now, my question is, how can these two big men play together? Because I think we're going to see them on the court quite a bit. What we know about Derek Queen from his prep days is he is a good passer. He's a guy who has some vision. But neither of these guys is necessarily a step out and shoot the ball kind of guy. Julian Reese over the last 2 seasons has attempted 0 3-point shots. And looking back at some of Queen's EYBL stats from his AAU days, he did not shoot a lot of threes either. So can Julian Reese develop a perimeter game? Did he develop a perimeter game at all? Because what I worry about with these two guys is spacing the floor. Now, what I like is that this is the Big Ten, and you need bigs in this league. These are two very good, very high caliber big men, and it feels like, it's something that Maryland has always felt like a little bit of an outlier, now entering its 11th season in the Big Ten, but this feels like a real Big Ten front court. My question, how effectively will these guys play together? How effectively can they space the floor, or will things get a little bunchy in there and make it hard to maneuver? That remains to be seen, but I'm very high on both these two guys. Julian Reese was not one of the guys who was honored in the preseason All Big Ten poll. There was 10 players selected to the preseason All Big Ten team. Julian Reese, not one of those guys. Nobody from Maryland on that list. Disappointing to me that you see some guys on there and not Julian Reese. So I think he has a lot to prove this season, but he's a guy who I've been impressed with every year he's been at Maryland, with the growth, the way he's developed, because he's dealt with a lot of turmoil. He's dealt with a lot of coaching changes. He's dealt with assistant coaching changes, a lot of roster turnover, and he's been a rock here for the Terps. The other thing that gets brought up with Reese a lot from a negative perspective is the fouling out. And that has been an issue. That has been a concern. At times, he can't stay on the court. But last year, he was better with that. He fouled out 3 times. He picked up 4 fouls 9 times. I still think that needs to be better because they need him on the court this season. And then my third and final storyline is, can Kevin Willard replicate the success he had with Jahmir Young with another relatively undersized mid-major guard who's transferring up, and that is Jacoby Gillespie. Jahmir Young transferred up from Charlotte, was really kind of a savior for the program, because coming off that 2022 season, I didn't have a lot of expectations going into Willard's first year in 2023, and Jahmir Young was a revelation. He kept Maryland relevant, he got them to the tournament, and he was, quite frankly, a joy to watch day in and day out when you watched a Maryland basketball game. Last year, he was a guy that kept them afloat. He was, one of the few positive aspects of that season. And I don't attribute the lack of success last year in any way, shape, or form to Jahmir Young, to be quite honest. I attributed a lot more to what was around him and how they were able to maximize that roster. So the question is, I don't know that anybody is going to just replace Jahmir Young, but how close can Jacoby Gillespie come to replacing Jahmir Young? Kevin Willard has always had point guards that he's relied on. Whether it was Jahmir Young here at Maryland, Kadari Richmond at Seton Hall. He's had a bunch of other good point guards during his time at Seton Hall. Miles Powell, another guy comes to mind. But here's another guy, Jacoby Gillespie, listed at 6'1", who was transferring up from the mid-major level and is going to be playing in the Big Ten. And, the Big Ten has this reputation, I think rightfully so, as a physical league, as a league that can be difficult for smaller guards. But I think Jahmir Young showed we can do it. I think Braden Smith, who is the preseason All Big Ten Player of the Year, has shown that you can do it. So we will see how well Jacoby Gillespie can fill the hole that Jahmir Young left and how much success Kevin Willard has with these point guards transferring up from the lower level. I'm really high on Gillespie. I think he can fill that role well. I think he's probably a better shooter than Jahmir Young was, but I color me skeptical that he will be able to replace him one-to-one, because that means you're looking at a guy who is going to be first team or second team all conference in his first season transferring up from Belmont. Want to finish things up here with a couple storylines throughout the Big Ten that I want to talk about. So number one, what does Purdue look like now that Zach Edey is gone? Will the league be more wide open, both literally and figuratively? Because you're missing a 7-4 back-to-back Naismith Player of the Year award winner. So literally, where will there be more space on the court in the Big Ten? And figuratively, is the league more wide open for somebody to take that crown away from Purdue, who's won back-to-back regular season championships? They were last year's national runner-up. A couple years ago, you had Zach Edey and Hunter Dickinson in the league, and it seemed like every team just had a 7-footer that you had to go against. And that's still the case to some extent. I like Vlad Golden, who transfers in to Michigan. He comes with Dusty May from FAU. That's Michigan's new head coach. Omar Ballo goes from Arizona to Indiana. Of course, Maryland brings back Julian Reese. Wisconsin has Stephen Crowell. But it feels like when you look at that preseason All Big Ten team, there's only one center on that list. It's Omar Ballo. That's it. And I think that's a far cry from what we would have seen a few years ago. And then when you look at the league and who's going to win it, yeah, Purdue still the favorite according to the preseason media poll, and that's a poll that's done by the Columbus Dispatch and Indianapolis Star in conjunction with one another. Purdue, the most first-place votes at 20. Indiana next at number 7. Then UCLA and Illinois, each garnering 2. Michigan State 1. Ohio State 1. I think this league is wide open this season. I don't think you just lose a guy like Zach Edey and can expect to still be the same exact team. I mean, I think your style of play is going to have to change dramatically, and I like Braden Smith, but I'm interested to see everybody on that team without Zach Edey. As far as the betting odds are concerned, Purdue is the favorite at plus 370, Indiana plus 600, Oregon and Michigan State plus 850, as well as Ohio State plus 850. So you can see just from the odds there, right, that there's no heavy favorite in this league. You compare that to like the ACC, Duke's plus 110 as the favorite in that league. So it's a much more wide open league. UConn in the Big East plus 125. I think there is a shot for, one of 7 or 8 teams here to really step up. Maryland, 24-1. Maryland is behind, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 teams. Maryland is 10th as far as the odds are concerned on FanDuel. So can Maryland be one of those teams? I'm not so sure at the moment. But last year, I thought Maryland was a team that could compete for the Big Ten, and they didn't. I think this league is as open as it has been in many, many years. Number 2, why is everybody talking about Rutgers? Well, it's really, really simple. Steve Peichel has brought in a recruiting class that Rutgers has never seen the likes of. They bring in two of the top three players in the country. Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper are both headed to Rutgers. Did you ever think you would see the day? Now, Dylan Harper makes sense. You know, he's the son of Ron Harper, former NBA guard. He's the brother of Ron Harper Jr., who, of course, went to Rutgers as well. So that one makes a little sense. But Ace Bailey is the other guy they bring in, the number 2 player in the class of 2024, only behind Cooper Flagg, who is at Duke, who you are going to be sick and tired of hearing of by the end of the year, although I am looking forward to watching him play. But he is definitely the next in the Duke line of the Duke hype machine there. But Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper are headed to Rutgers. Bailey, a 6'8 wing. Harper, a 6'6 combo guard. These two guys are trying to change the face of Rutgers basketball. What Steve Peichel has always done there is put together great defensive teams. Well, now he's going to have some offense. Now he's going to have some real scoring talent at his disposal. It's going to be interesting to see what he does. It's also going to be interesting to see if you can get 2 top 5 guys to buy into playing the kind of style of play that Rutgers has always played, which is very slow, defense first, grind it out. So that's why everybody is talking about the Scarlet Knights around the Big Ten. My third and final question for the Big Ten is, how do the 4 newcomers, UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon, impact this league? I'm particularly interested in the road trips, the east to west or the west to east for them, because when you look at what's happened in football so far this year, there's been 16 road trips to or from the Pacific time zone. The home teams are 11-5 straight up in those games. That's the football side, but I imagine it's going to have a similar impact on basketball. And I was taking a look at what Maryland faces, and I think it sets up very nice for Maryland for their one and only West Coast swing. On Saturday, December 28th, they play Maryland Eastern Shore at home. Then they play Thursday and Sunday at Washington and at Oregon. So they go out there for 2 games. So they play Saturday at home, have a break until Thursday when they play Washington, and then they go from Washington to Oregon. Then they come home, don't play again till they face UCLA on Friday, January 10th. So they'll basically have a full week off. I think that sets up very nicely for Maryland and is about as good as you could hope for. Now, as far as actually on the court, I don't know what to expect from those teams. UCLA, very disappointing season a year ago, but high expectations this year. They're number 28 in the preseason KenPom rankings, and there's some expectations around this program. As far as the odds go, they're 10-1 to win the Big Ten. They finished 3rd in the preseason media poll. They are expected, Mick Cronin is expected to revamp this team coming off a very, very bad season by UCLA standards. So I think there's some expectation there. Oregon, number 29 in the KenPom preseason poll. And then you have USC with a brand new head coach, and Eric Musselman comes over from Arkansas, where all he did was get to Elite 8 after Elite 8, it felt like. What can he do with that program? What kind of level can he take them to? And then Washington, who has struggled for years, brings in a new head coach, and Danny Sprinkle, who has gone to 3 straight NCAA tournaments, last year at Utah State. Before that, he went to 2 at Montana State. So those are 2 coaches coming into new programs. I'm curious about the travel, and I'm curious about what these teams mean to the league. Is it going to water down the league, or is it going to elevate the play? I think the addition of UCLA, I'm very confident about UCLA, Oregon, and then USC under Musselman being additive to the league and not watering down the league in any way. I'm interested in Washington. I mean, Sprinkle's done a great job, but Washington has struggled for many years now. And it's interesting because Washington is located in Seattle, which is a underrated basketball hotbed. But the last time that Washington made the NCAA tournament was 2019. The last time before that was 2011. So you're basically looking at a close to 15-year period now where Washington has made 2 NCAA tournaments. Danny Sprinkle, he has some work ahead, but I think I don't want to get into a whole conference realignment thing here, but I think these teams will actually be additive to the league. Especially, I'm really high on Eric Musselman and what he can do with USC. That's the show for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm glad you found it. If you like it, tell a friend. I want to start kind of slow with this thing. I'm going to be doing episodes once a week as we get the season underway. We'll evaluate that. We'll see how things are going, especially once Big Ten play picks up, and see if we do end up doing a little bit more. Don't want to overpromise quite yet, but I'm so excited for the season to get started, and I'm sure you are too. I'll be back next week to talk about the start of the season. I can't wait for it. Enjoy the games this week, everybody.